see if we have volume. It's actually picking up. Because people switch the settings in these classrooms all the time. And so half the time I'll come in and I'll start the recording. And when I get back to my office, there will be no sound. It will be 45 minutes of me walking around, drawing on the board, and absolutely no sound whatsoever. So come on. All right, sounds like I managed to find the right speaker. So we're in good shape. Anybody who walked in not here on Monday? All right, so one of the things that I wish sometimes is that I were a history professor rather than a marketing professor, because I go over there to the College of Liberal Arts and I walk past my colleagues who teach history, and there are a number of them who are still using these devices that you all have never even seen, called overhead projectors with transparencies on them, because they have literally taught the same courses for the past 30 years. And if you teach things like history of the United States from 1776 to the Civil War, for example, which I think is one of the classes, you have to take 2 history classes. Is that still correct? You have to take 2 history courses, in the courses that you usually take are American history, from the founding to the Civil War, and then from the Civil War to present. Is that what you all took, basically? And my colleagues over there are using the same transparencies and overhead projectors. Some of them have updated to putting it on PowerPoint, but they have the same ones and it doesn't change very much. And that's not true of marketing, because it is an enormously dynamic discipline. History is, by its very nature, although we are creating history every day, once it's created, it's static. It's fixed. We know who won the Revolutionary War in the United States, don't we? That's an objective fact that we know. The United States is not a colony of the United Kingdom anymore, Great Britain, and we know that, and it doesn't change. But that is not true of the marketing discipline, because everything changes so quickly. If you went back to even when I first started teaching marketing, the way we engage in attempting to promote businesses has changed radically, even in the last year or so. Certainly in the last 10 years, there have been radical changes. So when I was a kid growing up, if a business was something like Ford or GM or Dodge, for example, those are products that we all need, some kind of transportation, an automobile or a truck or things like that. How did they tell the general public about their new model of Ford F-150, for example, which has been the #1 selling truck in America for 30 straight years? How did Ford, if we went back to the time when I was a little kid growing up in the late 1980s and 1990s, how did Ford tell people about their new F-150? They just put it out there.
Newspaper?
Newspaper, that was one way. There were a lot of newspaper ads back then, but the biggest way in the 1980s and 1990s would have been what? Commercial, well, you have commercials in newspapers, but what kind of, advertising in newspapers? What kind of commercial? This is not difficult. This is not a difficult question.
Television?
Television. They would have launched an ad on TV, probably during the Super Bowl, for example. That would have been a huge time that, that they would have captured an audience's attention and been able to tell them about all of the wonderful things that Ford does in 30 seconds or less in an advertisement. And they still do that, right? They still have television commercials, but how many of you actually watch television anymore? There are still a lot of people that do. They're generally much older than me. I mean, I'm sure you watch television, but the way you watch television is not the way we watched television when I was a kid. When I was a kid growing up, and I grew up on a cattle ranch in northern New Mexico, we didn't have cable television. I remember when we moved into town and we got cable television, and I just did not know what I was going to do with myself. We had actually like 35 channels, and it was just like, what are we going to do with 35 channels or something like that? It was incredible to me. Now, like, I have cable television at home, and it's got, I don't know, 500 channels of absolutely nothing to watch. Absolutely nothing that, except for the news that I want to watch. They would have put out an ad on TV during the Super Bowl or some other time, and they would have told everybody about the new Ford F-150 and all of, like, it's got an increase in horsepower or something like that, and increased towing capacity. So they would have released that ad. Now, how do they tell people about their new products now? Social media. Who said that? Yeah, it's now, I mean, they still do television ads. I mean, that's still an important, I teach integrated marketing communication, so that's still an important aspect of telling people, particularly if you've got a lot of money and resources, because that's expensive. But a lot of it is now through social media engagement. And so it's by engaging people on this device, mobile media marketing. It's changed radically, and it is changing even faster than we can imagine with artificial intelligence. The ability to collect and analyze data and micro-target has increased so much that the way we go about marketing is radically different today than even 5 years ago. And so I would like to sometimes be a historian, because I feel like it would be very easy to just have the same slides and talk about the same thing, the Battle of Gettysburg over and over and over again. And we know who won that battle. And it's, again, an objective fact. And that's not what I can do in this class. I have to constantly keep evolving, because this discipline is enormously dynamic and it's changing so quickly. And artificial intelligence is going to make things so much different over the next few years that it will radically transform the discipline of marketing and how we go about doing this. It's already largely been transformed. We have had artificial intelligence, but the utilization of that, even by small and mid-sized businesses, has become just an enormously important factor in marketing. That's a radical transformation and a disruption in the way that we have historically done things. So having said that, is a history of marketing important? Is it important to understand sort of where the discipline came from, given the fact that the way we're going to do it is going to be radically different going forward than it was even 3 years ago? So should we have an understanding of marketing history, or is that just something that we should jettison and focus on the future? You're shaking your head no.
I think we should still learn it.
We should still learn marketing history. Why?
because I'm an art history major. All I do is art history.
Okay.
But I think it's important to know the past, and then we can evolve from the past and move forward. So it's just a different way
Okay.
of learning stuff.
So you think that we can learn something from that, we have something to learn from the past, even though it's radically different today than it was even 3 years ago. That there's something that we can gain, some kernel of knowledge that we can get from that. And you're an art history major. Why are you an art history major?
Because I feel like history has more words than history itself in a written form.
Okay.
So when I look at pieces, you can visually comprehend the emotion and what they're trying to portray with it. It's just, I like it. I love it. It's always what I've done. So I think history is really important. If we erase it, if we don't learn from it, then we can't learn from our mistakes.
Okay. The historian William Durant once said that the only lesson of history is that nobody learns the lessons of history. We repeat the same stupid mistakes over and over and over again, but nobody ever really learns the lessons of history.
No one's really wanting to really dive deep in it either. So it's like we repeat it because no one's wanting to listen to what it has to say.
So what you're saying is that we have a superficial understanding of history.
Yeah.
Rather than a deep understanding. I think that's true. I think a lot of times we don't engage in enough historical analysis. So I think that is correct. I do think that a history of the discipline is important because, as you said, we can glean things from the past. And although the way we are going to communicate, the media that we are going to use to communicate to people about the products and services that we have is maybe new and novel, many of the appeals that we will make to them using this new and novel technology are ancient techniques, right? Human emotion itself has not changed that much, although the way we go about engaging the world may be radically different. The emotion that we have and the connections that we make are not necessarily. Now, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that in this highly technologically sophisticated world, that one of the things that we do find is that we find a lot more isolation. And so we find more despondence among consumers because they are so isolated. There's a book that I read in my graduate program called Alone Together, which is a phenomenon that we are experiencing in which we're all here in a classroom, but a lot of times together, but we're isolated because we're doing what? When you go to dinner with your friends or out to, a event, what are you doing when you're at that event? You're on your phone. Yeah, you're sitting there with your friends watching the Thunder game and you're on your phone, right? You're not really like engaging in the moment. And that has had some profound impacts. I went to a restaurant with my family. My new sister-in-law, her father is the largest, he owns a vineyard in Italy, and he is the largest importer of Italian wine into the United States. And so he works with all of these really high-end restaurants to provide them with the finest Italian wines. And so he has restaurants, he knows all of these restaurateurs all over the United States. And wherever we go, we get, because he knows them personally, we get like the best tables and we have like enormously fantastic meals. And it's an incredible experience. And so one of the ones that we went to recently was in Fort Worth, Texas, in the Stockyards. And their new thing, it's a brand new restaurant. It's a chef who's been around for a long time in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but he's opened up this new restaurant in the Stockyards. And their thing is that in order to enhance the experience, they take your phone away from you. And they make you put it in this little bag that locks it, and you have to have a RFID key to get it unlocked. Now, the thing, it wouldn't have bothered me so much other than they give you the bag. If they had just taken the phone and put it on a shelf, I would have been fine with that. My friends and I have done this for a long time now, for about the last 10 years. When we have a dinner party, we agree, all of my friends, that we're going to either leave our phones in the car or you set it on, a shelf at the front door and turn it on silent and you don't pay any attention to it. Because if you have it on you and it vibrates, or even if it's a phantom vibration, we all have experienced these phantom vibrations, you're going to pick it up and look at it. That's just the reaction that we have now. And so we are eating at this restaurant and they put our phones in these little bags, they lock the bag and you can't get it out. And it was making me absolutely crazy. If they'd taken the phone away, I would have been fine. I'm used to that. My friends and I do that. We do it all the time. If you took it away, but they gave the phone back to me and I could feel it going off in my pocket the entire time. And it was making me absolutely, my OCD kicked in and I was crazy. Couldn't wait to get out of there so that I could get the phone back. So if nothing else, I should have turned it completely off so that I wouldn't have these experiences, right? But we have these phones and we're at these events, and because we all have fear of missing out, we're constantly on our phone rather than being engaged in the moment. And so we have to, as marketers, figure out how we're going to engage people in new ways, but the appeals that we make in many respects are still fundamentally sort of the same. We can still use the same kinds of appeals, although the mode of delivery of that may have changed, and the ability to adapt that delivery may have changed. It may become enormously dynamic. Ads forever and ever and ever were static. You put an ad in a newspaper and you ran it for a number of days or weeks or months, and it didn't really change. Now we have the ability with artificial intelligence and these devices to change those appeals very, very quickly and customize them in ways that are unique. But the appeal itself, in many respects, has not changed. And so I think a understanding of the marketing history is important so that we can understand where we came from, how we got here, and what we can learn in terms of the types of appeals and the types of products and services and things like that that people fundamentally desire. And how we got to this point is important. So I make an argument that marketing history is important, and there are basically a couple of different eras that we can talk about in terms of marketing eras, and they also correspond to what we call marketing philosophies. And what you'll see is that even though we have very sophisticated methods of delivery, there are many companies that are sophisticated, high-tech companies that still engage in what I view as being an older philosophy. So one of the things that we have to think about when we look at these is that when we talk about a philosophy and its corresponding era, there are many companies who still engage in these kinds of older types of philosophies, even in the contemporary area, and even among some of the companies that you might not think of as being terribly, outdated, because they're technologically sophisticated companies, but they cling to these older philosophies in spite of the fact that we have come up with new philosophies to deal with the contemporary situation that we find ourselves in. So for most of history, so marketing as a human activity has very ancient roots. We don't know when the first societies formed. We have ideas based on the anthropological and archaeological record of when the first societies sort of emerged. And at the point that they did, we think, modern archaeologists and anthropologists think that probably the first societies started to emerge and form in the Fertile Crescent. But we can't be absolutely 100% certain about that, because we are gaining new techniques and new ideas about that. But we think, probably it started somewhere in the Fertile Crescent. We have echoes of these beginnings of the formation of human societies in various ancient texts. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, we have it in the Bible, in the story of Adam and Eve, right? And when they get kicked out of the Garden of Eden, that is the beginning of sort of the the essence of creating a society, right? In the garden, everything is perfect. They have an abundance of everything. They don't have any needs or wants. Then they eat from the aptly named tree of knowledge, the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and they become aware. They have to leave the garden. And at that point, there is scarcity, right? So once we have scarcity, then we see the formation of societies, right? And man is by nature, according to Aristotle, a social creature. This is not something that we should go up in a balloon over, because Aristotle also acknowledges that geese are social creatures and bees are social creatures. But as human beings, when we come together in societies and form societies, at that point in time, we start to market, we start to differentiate and specialize in these communities. I can have a cow, you have chickens, I'll milk the cow, you have eggs, we'll trade, right? And we then see more and more specialization occur. So marketing as a discipline, as an activity, has ancient and historic roots. Once we start to see a division of labor in these communities that emerge from prehistory, what we find is that they begin to engage in what we recognize as marketing activities. Marketing as an academic discipline is fairly modern. It begins as an academic pursuit at the beginning of the 20th century. That's where we have a recognition that we can study this human activity as a distinct and separate discipline from some of the other disciplines. So for most of recorded history, until about 1920, what we have is we have the production era and production philosophy of marketing. And this can be summed up by a very old movie and one line in that movie. And the movie is Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner. And he has this vision that if he builds this baseball diamond in the middle of this cornfield, it's a rather sort of kind of stupid movie now, if you think about it. If you build it, they will come, is the takeaway line. If you build it, they will come. And he builds this baseball diamond, right? And these players who are otherworldly, ghosts or whatever, start coming and playing on the baseball diamond. So if you build it, they will come. That sums up the production era or the production philosophy of marketing. If I make something and it's useful, people will come and they will want it. They will buy it, right? And for most of human history, things were pretty scarce. And so you didn't have to do a whole lot to get people to buy it, because there weren't a lot of goods and services. For most of human history, we didn't mass produce goods. They were produced in small batches by artisans, and people lived in an agricultural life. They produced most of what they needed, and the excess they would then sell. And because there was a scarcity of goods and services, you didn't have to do a lot. You would go to the farmer's market in olden times, even, at the beginning of the 20th century in the United States, the vast majority of people were farmers. I think I mentioned this last time, that I used to ask my class, how many of you grew up in Oklahoma? It was a lot. I used to say, how many of you grew up on a farm or a ranch? And when I first started teaching 27 years ago, and lots of people would raise their hands. I have nobody that raises their hands anymore, or even know a farmer or have somebody in their family that was a farmer. But for most of human history, that's what we did. We raised things. So if I raised wheat and you raised corn, we might barter for things, and we would exchange them in sort of local venues. Most things were sort of locally produced. There was not a lot of international trade going on in the early societies. We do start to see some of that with the emergence of the Silk Road and boats and shipping and things like that. But that was really for the elite, right? The vast majority of people were still sort of stuck in their location where they were born, and they had to rely on this sort of production philosophy. Now, you still see this production philosophy, this idea, if you build it, they will come, even among technologically sophisticated companies. It's now kind of ancient history, but when Steve Jobs was in charge of Apple, He didn't engage in a lot of what we would consider good marketing practice in terms of asking the consumer what they want. He believed that he was smarter than everybody else and he could tell you what you wanted. And largely he did. He was pretty successful at doing that, at telling us what we want and getting us to buy it. It was a completely product-driven company under Steve Jobs. And it's so successful that let's take a poll. How many of you in here have an iPhone? Raise your hands. The vast majority of you in here have an iPhone. That's pretty successful. Is this the best platform? If you have an iPhone, you think it is. You're shaking your head, no, it's not the best platform. Why? You've got an Android, so you think that's the best platform. Why do you think that's the best platform? Why do you think it's better? Have you had an iPhone? Then how would you know?
Because iPhones break easily.
Androids break easily.
No, they don't.
What, like objectively, how are they tougher than an iPhone?
I feel like our software is better than y'all only got good camera quality. That's it. And y'all can FaceTime. That's all y'all can.
You get it done. So I want to go back to, you said Apple breaks easier. I'd be willing to bet if I took your Droid and ran over it, it's gonna break, right? If I ran over it with my car, it's gonna break, isn't it?
Yes.
All right. What makes it better? So yes, we have FaceTime, which is very useful, right? What else did you say we have?
Good camera quality.
Good camera. So you're willing to admit objectively that Apple has better camera
Yes.
than the Droid. And you're willing to admit objectively that FaceTime
Yes.
is a useful service.
Yes.
So what is it that makes the Droid better?
Even though we don't have those features, it's still building up there. And also, our I just like my Android.
Okay. You just like it's an emotional attachment to your phone. The reason I have an iPhone is I'm a licensed commercial pilot now, is not available on an Android. You have to have an Apple device. It's called ForeFlight, and they will not make an app for Android. Don't know why. Have no clue, can't get it. Just won't do it. Garmin will not interface with an Android. Have no clue why. So I don't have a choice. But I mean, Steve Jobs didn't ask anybody. So what we wanted or what he thought was good, he told us what was cool. And objectively, in this classroom at least, now we cannot apply the characteristics of this classroom to everything else, but at least in this classroom, he's successful. We have how many people that have Droids in here? 2, right? Is that what I had? 2? Was there anybody else? Who else had 1, 2? Anybody else? Everybody else has an Apple. When this device came out, so I was in industry when the first iPhone was released. And I remember all of the executives in the company that I worked for wanted us to switch over. At the time, the company had given us all BlackBerries. And if you have used a BlackBerry, which most of you have never even seen this device because you're too young, but if you'd used a BlackBerry, it was actually a much more useful device for business because it had a full keyboard. That you could actually, if you know the QWERTY keyboard, if you know how to type on a QWERTY keyboard, you could get a similar, I could get really, really fast at typing while I was doing other things without looking at the device. But Apple said, that takes up, in order to enjoy this device, you have to have a certain amount of screen real estate. And so we're not gonna do that, because if you have a full keyboard, like the BlackBerry did, what are you doing? You're sacrificing real estate for the keyboard and limiting the amount of real estate you have for the screen, right? So it became all a touch screen. Now, the touch screen, from a business standpoint, is not terribly useful because I cannot touch type on it, can I? No, you have to look at the device, which is less efficient, right? Than if you know how to keyboard and can touch type, that's less efficient. So the BlackBerry, but Apple told us what was cool, and everybody thought that they wanted that. I got on a plane, and this was in the early days of the release of the iPad, and I'm on the plane with this guy flying back. I'm teaching at New Mexico State at the time, and I'm flying back to Oklahoma. And this guy gets on the plane with me, and he's got a brand new iPad. It was when they were very, very new. And I said, "How do you like the iPad?" He's like, "Oh man," he's like, "it's great. It's just fantastic. I use it for everything. You know, they were built for business." And I'm like, "No, the iPad was not made. It was made to be fun, but businesses thought they were cool, and executives wanted them, and so Apple managed to convince companies that they needed to get them for their executives, even though they're not a terribly useful device. Because again, what does an iPad not have? A keyboard. Now, I don't know that that's all that important anymore, because you don't have to type anymore, do you? You can just talk and it'll do it now, but they didn't at that point in time. The talk to text was very limited. So they're an example of a company that is a technologically sophisticated company that was still using and still does. Now they have engaged in more customer research after Steve Jobs died. I mean, Steve Jobs, for example, said there will never be an iPad mini. And the minute he died, what did they do? They had an iPad mini, right? The minute he passed away, they had an iPad mini, because people wanted something that was like this. The regular iPad was big and clunky, right? And the iPad minis, if you're in a car or on an airplane and you have very limited amount of space, the iPad mini is far more convenient to have than this big clunky device. But that's an example of using a production philosophy of, if I build it and it's cool and people want it, they'll buy it. Microsoft releases for forever and ever and ever. They released really crappy products, and we still bought it. Why? I don't know. It was better than the alternative. There used to be products out there that competed. So in my profession, we clung to them for a long time. We did not use Microsoft Word for word processing in the legal profession forever and ever and ever and ever. There was another product out there. It was called WordPerfect. And WordPerfect was a better product. It was a better product for lawyers, particularly. And one of the reasons it was a better product is because if you knew the macro keys, you didn't have to stop and use a mouse. Stopping, if you type, so I can type 160 words a minute accurately, because I grew up in a time, like, I actually took typing in high school, which was on a typewriter. I know you all have never seen this device. It was actually on a typewriter, which, just like you'd hit it and the keys would go and like hit the paper, right? So I can type 160 words a minute. If I have to use it, and with WordPerfect, if I wanted to, for example, center something, I knew the commands and I could just type it without looking at it. If I want to do that in Microsoft Word, what do I have to do? You have to use the cursor on the mouse to, now I think with, talk to text, you can now get away with that. But for years, WordPerfect was better, and lawyers clung to it forever because it was easier to use and faster than Microsoft Word. But Microsoft Word took over because the rest of the OS was so useful, right? That that it became the dominant product. Still the dominant product today. I have students that, for example, because PowerPoint is still so dominant, they'll be using a Mac. And in one of my classes that's online, I have narrated PowerPoints, which that's kind of ancient technology now, right? And they're like, I can't get it to work. And I'm like, are you using a Mac? And they're like, yeah, it doesn't work on a Mac. Now there's a way you can get it to work, but you have to figure it out, right? Anybody know how to use, I mean, I may have changed actually in the last 6 months, I don't know. But until very recently, how did you get narrated PowerPoints on a Mac? You know how to do it? Nobody knows how to do this. You have to get a Windows interface. You have to download a Windows client onto the Mac, and then you can play it. Very, very clunky to do, right? So there are still these people that even though they're engaged in high tech, they still use this production philosophy of if I make it and it's cool and it's really cutting edge, people will want it and they'll buy it, and I don't have to do very much. Beginning with the Industrial Revolution, we start getting to the sales era, and this is a selling philosophy. So now we're mass producing goods and we have a lot more of it. And so it's no longer that we can just rely on if you build it, they will come, because there are multiple people that have now entered the market, and we're increasing the market size from just being sort of a local geographic area to being a nationwide way of distribution. So if we think about the early parts of the Industrial Revolution, what was it that Henry Ford did? People think that he invented the assembly line. He didn't invent the assembly line. What he did was modify the assembly line so that it became a moving assembly line. And that starts the mass production of the automobile, right? Which radically transforms the way we go about moving, right? Because now all of a sudden there were automobiles before Henry Ford's Model T, but they were largely luxury items for the very, very wealthy. They were custom built. There weren't a lot of roads back then, so the vast majority of people still got around by horse and buggy. Then we get the Model T, and of course this is an example of production philosophy. He's the first one, and so they used to say, the joke was you could have a Model T in any color you wanted so long as that color was, anybody know? Huh?
Black.
Black, that's right. You could have a Model T in any color so long as that you wanted, so long as the color you wanted was black. They were all black. Then we get more people entering the market. After Ford introduces this cheap, efficient product, other people say, hey, well, we can do that, right? And so other companies start to enter the marketplace, and all of a sudden you have competition. And so you can no longer just sell black cars, right? Now we're going to start to get differentiation in the product line. So other car companies enter the market and they start selling different, so that you had one model of car. Now you're going to have different models of cars. And at the point that you start to have more competition, you get a sales philosophy and you get the sales era. So from about 1920, with the rise of the Industrial Revolution until about 1960, what we focus on is it's no longer enough to just build it and get people to come. We're now going to have to sell it. We're going to have to say, hey, our product is better. Why is it better than the Model T? The Dodge brothers, for example, come into the market. Well, what do they offer? Well, they offer different models, right? And different types of functions and features. Basically, the Model T was just a way for you to get from the farm to town in a more efficient manner than using a horse. Why? Horses are unreliable. They are, I have horses. I grew up on a cattle ranch, right? They're difficult to deal with. I used to ask how many of you have ridden a horse in my classes, and I would get overwhelmingly a large show of hands. Even people who didn't grow up on a cattle ranch or a farm, they had friends who had horses or something. Now I ask that question. I'll ask the question today. How many of you have ridden a horse? Oh, wow. This is an unusual class. Quite a few. They're difficult creatures. I love them, right? But they have a mind of their own, and they can get rid of you if they want to because they are larger than you. And so if they want to do something other than what you want them to do, they're perfectly capable of doing that. And now you've got this car and you don't have to deal with the horse. It's covered. So if it's raining outside, you're not riding in the rain. Even if you had a covered wagon, right? Somebody still has to sit outside and drive it. So this is a much better thing. But now we get more competition in the marketplace. Automobiles become more prevalent. And so we have more and more producers of them. We get differentiation. And so now you're going to have somebody go out and sell these to say, hey, this is why you want to buy a Dodge instead of a Ford, right? Because you can get different colors if you want a bigger engine, or if you want more seats. You've got these different things that we can offer. We've got different features which have benefits. And so we have the selling philosophy. Now, most of the pejorative attitudes that people have about sales, and I am a professor of sales here at the University of Central Oklahoma, and I run a sales competition, a lot of the bad attitudes that people have about selling comes from this era. Because the focus of this era was to get your attention, create some desire, and get some action on your part, which is to buy. So we used something called the AIDA model. Awareness, interest, desire, action. So I'm going to make a pitch. I'm going to get some interest. I'm going to then try to close, right? And get you to buy this. Now, we still see this philosophy being used in lots of businesses today. So it's about creating some awareness of what it is that I want you to buy, getting some interest in that, creating a desire, and then getting an action out of you, which is the sale, the close, right? And we have lots of students who want to get degrees in business because they know that if they want to have success or a better chance of success, that you probably want to get a degree in business because there are jobs out there, right? But a lot of our students say, I want to get a degree in business, but God, I don't want to go into sales because they have this horrible experience of dealing with a salesperson. And a lot of the attitudes that we have to overcome in running a sales program is telling students that it's not about just doing this. It's not about just, making a pitch, getting people's money, and then moving on down the road. It's about actually engaging with the client, building a relationship, understanding and adding value and engaging in value co-creation. But because a lot of you have had experiences that rely on this selling model, you have this bad taste in your mouth about sales. I'll give you, the one that most people have the most experience with is almost everybody who's in here probably came to a campus today in a car. Again, you didn't come in a horse-drawn carriage, probably, right? Some of you might have ridden a bike, although that's not really all that great in Oklahoma. Like today it would be okay to ride a bike. Next week, you're gonna want to ride a bike to campus to come to class. What's the high gonna be on Monday next week when we come to class? 22, right? Like 22 is not sure you want to ride a bike in 22-degree weather. So you're probably going to have an automobile, and you're going to come to class in that automobile. And how many of you bought that automobile? Just a few of you. The rest of you got the automobile from someone else. Okay. If you bought an automobile, it's a horrifying experience.
It's awful.
It's sheer terror. Right?
Especially if you're young.
Huh?
Especially if you're young.
Yeah. Because I mean, it's just, it's high pressure sales. And you feel disadvantaged, and it's a huge risk involved, right? This is for most people in the United States, this is the second biggest purchase that they will make. The first biggest purchase that most people make is their house. The second is an automobile. The average price of a new automobile among all models is something like, and I'm probably behind on this now, it's something like $65,000 the last time I looked. The average price of a new automobile. That's if you take all models. Now, or do you have to buy a $65,000 automobile new? No, right? There are lots of automobiles that are not, but if you take the average among all models that are offered, right, it's about $65,000. What accounts for that price? Well, let's just look at, when we take the average, for example, the average price of an automobile, again, across all models. What's the number one most popular truck in America for 30 years? Unless it's changed this year, it's been the Ford F-150. What is the average price of a Ford F-150? Something like $75,000. And that's a fairly basic model. You want the electric model? I think they've stopped making the electric model. Have they stopped making it? No, they still make the Ford,
The Lightning.
the Lightning. Yeah, what's the price of the Lightning? Like hundred and something odd $1,000. What's the average price of the Cadillac Escalade? Oh, it's more than that. It's like 110. It's the average, right? Like it's expensive. These are, so you feel disadvantaged, and it's a huge investment, and it's a huge risk on your part, and so you feel like, I mean, you come out of there, and almost everybody that I know who's bought a car has instant regret over the, like, what did I just sign up for? The payments, the insurance rates are crazy right now. So a lot of the bad attitudes that we have towards sales come from this era where it was like, I just got to get some money out of you, and then I'm going to move on down the road, right? And you see this in a lot of businesses today. They still use this philosophy. My favorite event during the fall is to go to the fair, the Oklahoma State Fair. I am just absolutely amazed at the things that people would rather have than their own money. When you go to the fair, it's a plethora of opportunities to spend, and it's just fascinating to me what people want. And it's fascinating to me the products that they sell at the fair, because I'm sitting there thinking, I don't think I would buy a $5,000 massage chair from some vendor at the fair who's going to be gone next week to the Texas State Fair, right? They're going to move to the Texas State Fair. And what happens when this thing breaks? Which it probably will. It's got lots of moving parts to it. What am I going to be stuck with? But they sell them at the fair. And you see these people, they've got like a speaker out, and they've got a little microphone with, it's attached to a headset, and they're talking, and they're trying to sell you the latest stainless steel cookery or Ginsu knife or ShamWow or whatever it is that's the hot thing this year at the fair. The massage chair, the purple mattress, whatever it is. And they're just trying to get some interest, some desire, and then sell you something. And they're going to be gone. When the fair ends, they're going to move on to the next fair, which is probably the Texas State Fair, or something like that. And so a lot of this bad attitude comes from the sales era. The third era, I wonder what happened to my slide. The third era of marketing is what we call, our third philosophy is called the marketing era. I guess I deleted one slide. So then we have the marketing. And that goes from about 1960 to roughly the 1980s, maybe 1990s. And what we see in this era is a recognition that, and this is when we get the science of marketing, a recognition that we can study human behavior and figure out what people want. That we can engage with the consumer and figure out what it is that they want. And then we're going to develop that and sell it to them. So this is really, once we get to the marketing era, this is when we see a rapid advancement in the academic discipline of marketing and the production of marketers as a profession, as a academic pursuit where you can get a degree and we will teach you how to figure out what it is that people want. And that goes till about 1980. And we still engage in that. Lots of companies still do this. They hire huge research teams to figure out what it is that people want and engage in marketing research. And then we move into the final era, which is the relationship era. Or the era of value co-creation. So in the marketing era, we recognize that we can study people and figure out what they want. But now we recognize that it's not just enough to study people and figure out what they want. Now what we want to do is we want to engage the consumer, make them a part of the team, and build something called customer lifetime value. And the idea here is that it is cheaper to keep a customer than it is to prospect for a customer. So if I just figure out what you want and I sell you that, right? It's still maybe only a one-shot deal, particularly if it's a high-risk product like a car. But if I can continue to engage with you after the sale, I'm likely to keep you. There's a car dealer in Dallas, and people from Oklahoma actually go down there and buy cars. It's called Sewell Cadillac, and Mr. Sewell actually wrote a book, and he trained his salespeople on his sort of philosophy, which is he called it the $1 million customer. And he said the average customer over the lifetime of a Cadillac, the average lifetime value of that customer, if you maintain that customer relationship, will spend over $1 million. And he wrote this book a long time ago. And he said, then if you multiply that by the amount of people that they will refer to you, if they are really happy with you, that customer's value increases even more. So it's now not just about figuring out what you want, but also engaging with you after, which Sewell was one of the first to do this, to recognize that it's about following up. It's about providing service after the sale. So when your Cadillac goes in for work, they were one of the first ones that would give you a loaner car so that you didn't have to, take a taxi or have somebody pick you up if it was going to be multiple hours and you needed to get to work. Keeping contact with you after that sale. How are you doing? What do you, what is it that we can help you with? Are you enjoying your new Cadillac? So it's about building and maintaining relationships. Now, so yeah, we still study the consumer, that's important, but it's not just enough to study the consumer and figure out what they want at this moment in time. Because we have to remember that that's a snapshot. It's like a poll. Polls are what people want right now. And what you want right now may not be what you want tomorrow. And for most of you, that's going to change, right? Over the course of your life, what you want is going to change radically. It's changed radically for me over the course of my lifetime in terms of what I'm interested in and what I want compared to when I was a young professor at 22 versus now at 51. The kinds of products and services and things that I'm interested in. So we have the relationship era of marketing. Can't believe I deleted that slide. So, is marketing an art or a science? I've given you part of the answer. You think it's a science? Why?
I mean, if big companies are hiring big research teams to come in and, figure out what people want, I think that alone is a science.
Okay, so if we can hire a research team and we can study you from a scientific perspective, which is we start out with an observation. People want to buy stuff or they need to buy things, right? Like they need to buy a car in order to get around. So we've got that now, figuring out what it is that they need in that car and how we're going to make it. Yeah, that's a scientific inquiry, right? We can do that using the steps of so we start out with observation. Based on those observations, we form hypotheses. We then test those hypotheses, right? See if we're correct in predicting. And we're very, very accurate now if you follow this sort of methodology in predicting what people want using extremely advanced scientific techniques like fMRI technology. And the school that I graduated from, they actually had partnered with the psychology department in order to get an fMRI machine so that they could then watch. So we can put you in this machine, we can expose you to marketing persuasion and then see what parts of the brain are firing when we give you that marketing persuasion. So it's, we can with high degrees of precision, look at the brainwave activity and figure out whether or not you're interested in that. And we don't even have to do that so much anymore as we can gather huge amounts of data. If you have a Facebook page, Facebook has literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of data points on you that we can use to analyze what it is that you're going to be interested in. I mean, just sort of basic, simple examples. In the early days of Facebook, right? I was married. I checked married on the profile for Facebook. Several years later, I got divorced and I checked single, and all of a sudden I got all of these little ads on the side of, the banner ads and stuff like that on Facebook for singles groups. And now it's not just singles groups, right? I mean, they can target with a great deal of precision. Whether or not it's, an active lifestyle versus something else, whether you're, a Christian single or not. Right? We provide all of this information to them and they can figure out with a great deal of precision what it is that we're going to be interested in. And we can customize that to you. So there is a science to it. What's the art part?
You're creating something.
Huh?
You're creating something.
Creating something, right? Yeah. So the ad itself, the appeal. So we know based on this big data set that you've given us in Facebook, you've got a Facebook account, and some of you probably don't get on Facebook because that's yesterday, right? So you're probably on Instagram, which is still, what is Instagram? It's Meta, right? So you're now posting. How many of you have moved from Facebook to Instagram as your primary, how many of you still use Facebook a lot? What else do you use if you don't use Facebook or Instagram? What are some of the other platforms? Snapchat?
Twitter.
What? Twitter?
X.
Okay. X. Yeah. Have they figured out what they are? I don't know. So Snapchat, X, all of these platforms provide an enormous amount of rich data on you that you're giving for free. You're just letting us know. what it is that you want and desire. And so we can then target specifically to you these ideas, right? So, but how you engage in that, the appeals that you make, that is very much an artistic pursuit to some extent. The way we craft the images that are shown to you. And it's becoming much easier. It used to be that this required a lot of stuff. Now, with artificial, I mean, I'm sure you all have played around with this. You've artificially enhanced your photos, haven't you? Try it, see what it comes up with. It's amazing. So we can do this, but that is somewhat creative and artistic, right? Is everything that we teach on a college campus an art or a science? Or is there some third category? Is everything an art or a science? Let's think about. So if we go art history, art or science,
I would say, I honestly think it's kind of both,
okay? Why do you think it's both?
because you're exchanging something, but then you also, it's, with science, there's a lot of science behind it with the research and everything, but at the same time, art is also research. And so it kind of plays in both ways, because you have to create something, but you have that idea with art, but then it's transferring it over to the science side in order to create it.
Okay.
So it's also, you exchange stuff and then you can collaborate. There's a lot into it, and more than just one or the other. A mixture of both.
One of the things that we used to say is that art is subjective, science is objective. But is it? Studies in aesthetics now suggest that there's a science to art. We can predict with a high degree of certainty whether or not a song is going to be popular. Popular songs all have certain mathematical formulas that they follow. We can mathematically map. So I listened to this lecture, the Grisham lectures, from a mathematician who did this lecture called The Maths of Music. And we can put music through various analyzers, and we can tell whether or not it follows the patterns that the human brain most likes. It's really, really fascinating. Studies in art show that if you ask artists from all different sort of cultures to draw an ideal plein air scene, they all draw the same scene. And they have different colors and some things, but it's all basically the same proportions. It's the same kind of setting.
I mean, when something's created in art, it's then taught to everyone else. Like linear perspective was not created till 1490 something by Brunelleschi. And then, so from that point, before that, you could tell they didn't know what linear perspective was. But now we do, and that's what's showcased the most, because there's an understanding of just perception.
And everybody now uses that as opposed to a flat, two-dimensional depiction.
It's the same with Greek and Romans. I mean, the poly thing that we talked about yesterday, it's used in Greek and Romans, but they didn't know about it, so they copied the Egyptian art at first. Until they made into math and science, and they realized we can use this in art for our sculptures.
Is science, is biology, for example, completely objective? What we choose to study is inherently subjective, isn't it? So even in the most objective of disciplines, physics, for example, that which we choose to study is a subjective value judgment of what interests me, right? So what we're seeing is that as we find and as we become more and more sophisticated and advanced, the distinctions between art and science are not as clear as we once thought they were. And marketing is both an art and a science. It is an art in figuring out how to persuade people. Communication is an art, but it's also a science. I know from studies in pedagogy, there are different things that I have to do with you now to keep engaged, to keep you engaged. When I started as a professor, a very young professor, and I wasn't a marketing professor, here at the University of Central Oklahoma, I taught political science. And my first semester of teaching, one of my senior colleagues said to me, he said, well, you always know when you've got a good class or a bad class within the first 30 seconds of the class. And I said, how is that, Dr. Jones? How is it that you know whether or not you've got a good class or a bad class within the first 30 seconds? And he said, if I walk in on the first day and I say, good morning, class, and they respond with good morning, I know it's going to be an awful class. And I said, why is that? That seems like the appropriate response, isn't it? He said, if it's a good class, they write it down. There is no response. They write it down. I now beg students. I'll say things like, this is a test question. And I'll look and see how many people are writing it down. Yeah, 3/4 of the class. You know, I'll say it again. This is a test question. Again, crickets. So we know as a result of largely this device, when I went to college, we didn't have this device. So like, you know, what else were you going to do in class? Because you weren't distracted by your phone. Nobody had a cell phone when I went to college. Very few people had a cell. I mean, they were around, but they were an actual phone. Like this is a poorly named device. To call it a phone is like nobody talks on this. You all don't want to talk on this. You want to text. Why would you want to talk to anybody? How many of y'all answer your phone when people call? You all say you do. You know, we'll see. I'll call you, see if you answer your phone. Who the hell is this?
What if I call you back?
Huh?
What if I just call you back? You might be busy. I'll call you back.
Okay.
I call people, I don't text. Like, I will call you instead of texting you, because I don't respond to my texts. I rather you call me and then we can discuss stuff than texting back and forth, because then I just get lost in the queues. So,
Right. Oh, I agree. Like if it's more than 120 characters, you need to call me.
Yeah, I'm not
Because
gonna
I'm
sit
not
there
gonna
all
read it.
day, yeah.
You know, I'm not gonna read that. But you know, I mean, like when I was in college, cell phones, I actually had a cell phone in college. It was a phone. It weighed 7 pounds. It came in a bag. If you talked on it, it had a battery life of 30 minutes. So you actually, and it did not text. There was no texting at that point. It was, all it did was function as a phone that you could carry around beyond your home. So, you know, it was different. We know from studies in pedagogy that I can't just rely on saying things. I have to do different things to keep people engaged, which is why I have these stupid ducks, because it's something that's novel and new. Any other professors you have use ducks to keep, you know, to like as a reward system to keep you engaged? It's a way of ensuring that I am in some way switching things up, keeping it different, changing my inflection so that I keep your attention. I walk around a lot. I don't, there's an old movie now called Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Ben Stein plays the high school teacher in that, and his stands at a left, Bueller, Ferris, Bueller, right? I can't teach that way anymore. When I went to college, people did teach that way. I had this, I put off taking University of Physical Science until my last semester because I just absolutely did not want to take it. I hated it. And like the teacher would stand up there and he could write with both hands. It was amazing. He could write on the chalkboard with both hands, and he would write the entire hour on the chalkboard, these mathematical formulas. And then he would turn around at the end of class and beam like he had done something. And maybe he had, but it was like he was having this little math party at the board and he forgot to invite anybody to it. And maybe it was brilliant, I don't know, right? So we have to do different things to keep you engaged, to keep you involved. We know that, and that's science, but also there's an art to it. There's an art to keeping people interested. And it's about being able to read body language in here and seeing whether or not I'm making any kind of connection with you. So there's an art and a science. So it's both. Is there a third category? I think there is. I think it's pure logic, right? There are things that are logical. Mathematics, for example, is mathematics a science? Mathematicians, some of them will say yes. Some of them will say, well, it's the language of science. If we talk about abstract mathematics, we can have formulas that are logical that have no application in the real world. So it's just pure logic. And so I think there's a third category, which may be pure logic, that we teach. And you can take a class in logic and critical thinking. When I took the LSAT to go to law school, that was all logic games. It had no basis in reality. But they were fun little games that you could figure out using logic, but they didn't have any real basis in reality. So what is the first step to establishing a discipline? What do we need to do if we're going to decide that marketing is a discipline? So I told you that marketing has, as an activity, ancient origins, but what do we need to have an academic discipline? How can we study something from an academic perspective? What is it that we need to have? What makes it, if we say that marketing is a science and we're using the scientific method, what makes it different than, say, biology? What is biology?
Study of life.
The study of life. Biology is the study of living things, organisms. Chemistry is the study of the reaction of chemicals, right? Psychology is the study of the mind, human emotions, right? Sociology is the study of human beings and groups, unlike psychology. So psychology is an individualistic study. We're going to study the individual. Sociology is going to study group behavior. So what makes marketing different than all these other things? Well, it's that we're going to have to define the domain of marketing as distinct and separate from, say, psychology, which is the study of human behavior, right? Marketers study human behavior. We call it consumer behavior. We study group behavior as well. What makes something popular? A lot of times in marketing, what makes something popular is the fact that the group likes it. What, like the popularity of the iPhone in this classroom is a sociological phenomenon. Why? Because you were influenced by, did you just decide to buy the iPhone? No, like you were probably influenced by your parents, your friends, your coworkers, things like that in terms of buying. So I'm out of time, so we'll stop there. If you got ducks, come see me so I can give you your points, your bonus points, and I will mark where we stopped. And I will stop the live stream.